Welcome to the Parent Advocacy Resource Team for all ages and stages of parenthood. I'm Irene Gouge with Loving Lessons Sleep Consulting and Postpartum Doula Solutions, and your host here at PART, where we partner with parents to create a trusting network of professional services to provide families with proactive options as they navigate the journey of being a family through education, advocacy, empowerment, and connection. So one of the things we like to do here on the PART segments that we're sharing with families is we talk about the things I never thought I would say as a parent. And our guest today, she says, put it on the calendar. And boy, can I relate to that. Jennie's son was diagnosed with autism, and that changed her life fundamentally. She is learning to live a life of meaning and fulfillment, and she encourages and inspires others to live an empowered life, living purposefully to define their meaning through her work with ConsiderJennifer Consulting. Thank you so much, Jennie, for being here.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
So tell me a little bit about put it on the calendar. What does that look like and sound like in your house?
So it got started when I was doing some of my own personal development work, and in conjunction with my son's need to have structure in his own life. And I realized the incredible benefit of owning your time and how significant it was to make sure that the structure that you put together for your day allows you to do everything you want to get done in your day, including your leisure time and your self-care time and your time with your kids' time and all the time. And so I really got a hold of that idea, and I live by a calendar now. And so a lot of times I'm encouraging my almost 18-year-old daughter to own her time. If you want to get something done, even if it's planning a trip to go to the zoo, you need to actually put it on the calendar, because if you don't, the likelihood of getting it done is slim to none. Because life has a way of just coming in and taking over, and then it's lost. So that's where that came from.
That is such a great tip to share with the parents out there, for sure. If you are watching this, post down below and let us know if you use a calendar with your family. I will say I have found freedom with the calendar now that I have a tween and a teen in my house, where I could say, go ahead, put it on the calendar, because we have a shared Google calendar. So yes, it kind of is a little bit empowering for children.
It is. It teaches them good skills too. So it's good.
Well, that's awesome. Well, so tell me a little bit about how ConsiderJennifer Consulting came about.
It's the culmination of my own journey and experience through being okay with my son's diagnosis. He was 3 when he was diagnosed. And I think, like most parents with a child with special needs, there's a huge grief process, and it's perpetual. It doesn't really end in the way that you think it's going to. You have plateaus, but you never really it feels like you never get to this place where you're just good. And I was not satisfied with that. And I was so afraid for myself and for my son and what our lives were going to be like, and decided that I wasn't going to accept that as an outcome, and that I was going to figure out how to make our lives good. And through that process, I came to the realization that it's really about mindset. It's really about how you decide to perceive things, how you decide to define what it is that's happening to you. We have a tendency to think that we're looking for meaning, and the truth is we create meaning. It's not the same thing. And when you realize that you create meaning, that means you have control over it. And having that control shifts everything that you experience and the way you experience it. And when I figured that out, all I wanted to do was to show people how they could do that themselves, because you don't have to stay stuck in this place where you feel like you can't do anything about your circumstances. And I just think that's a powerful lesson for everyone, particularly for parents with children that have special needs. So that's where it came about.
Jennie, your son was diagnosed at 3. I think it's interesting that you use the term grief, because sometimes we don't realize as parents we have these moments to grieve. I oftentimes will share that we have some sort of unresolved grief that we're holding on to. And
Yes.
how long would you say it was until you realized? Because I think people watching this will want to know, well, how long? Like, when will this be fixed?
Well, so I mean, everybody's different, right? Because everybody's
Sure.
tolerance with grief is different. And I use tolerance very deliberately there. The first 3 months after my son's diagnosis, I was in huge denial. Like, you couldn't even say the word autism to me. I would become defensive and angry or start crying. Like, I didn't have space to even entertain that as a reality for myself. In about 3 months, I realized I had slipped into a pretty big depression, and it was impacting my other child, who is neurotypical, and my marriage in a very significant way. And so it was like, okay, you got to do something. Then at that point, I went to war with autism. I read everything that I could get a hold of, and my entire attitude was, I will defeat this. That also did not help. I'd like to think that it would, but it didn't. My very hard, tight control of needing to make the circumstance different actually created more problems. And, I was literally laying on my bathroom floor in complete despair and realized that everything that I was trying to do, I was doing the wrong way. And that was like almost a year-long process for me, getting to the point where I was on the floor in the bathroom and having the self-realization that my war with autism was not going to help. It was like a year. And that was still just the start of another really long journey in learning how to change my perception of what was happening in a way that I felt better and confident that my life was going to be meaningful and my son's life was going to be meaningful, and being okay with what was. So I mean, my goal is to try to make it not as long for other people.
Right. It's like, sometimes we can share that awareness, right? We all are on this journey and we're trying to short circuit that like long process.
Right.
I mean, it took me 4.5 years sleep deprivation to figure out the whole sleep thing. So
right.
It's like, if we kind of have some education and can kind of understand we're not alone.
Right. So I feel like I went through a trial and error process. And so what I can give back to others, my contribution is to be able to help other people not have to do so much trial and error.
Yeah.
So
for sure. I think it's interesting because I think probably some of the parents out there watching, myself included, might be control freaks, right? Like, and I think it's interesting that you said you were holding on to that control, and it's recognizing that we are sometimes not in control.
No.
And our children are their own little beings.
They are. And they are equally on a path of living their own life. I think we self-identify a lot with our kids and feel like our kids aren't good if they're not like us. And the truth is, there's a lot of different ways to be good. And their way of being good is equally valid. We don't have, I think a lot of times, at least for me, what I realized is a lot of times I feel threatened when they do something in a way differently than I would do it, even though their way of doing it is perfectly fine. So yes, it's a lot of control in that.
We have the conversation in our house that there are different flavors of ice cream.
Yes.
They're all equally good.
Very much.
You just have to allow the options to happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But it is a journey to get to that place.
Yes, it is.
Go. And so, Jennie, I'm curious to know, what did you learn or discover about your son through this journey dealing with autism?
So one of the big things that I've discovered is that he's much more capable than I was afraid he wouldn't be. I was so, they threw this word at me, and at the time, the only experience I had with that word was like Rain Man, the movie, right? And that was just so not what I saw in my son. And so I unintentionally limited what his possibilities were because I wasn't able to see him as him. I was working off of this label. The other thing that I really discovered is that there's not a right way to do things, and that a lot of the stuff that my son needs and really, really needs, actually everybody can benefit from. And that was, I think, probably one of the most powerful things, like the calendar thing. My son needs a really, really structured day. It helps him navigate life. But I actually really benefit from structuring my day as well. And the more structure I have, allowing for flexibility with like life happening, the more effective I am, the more productive I am, the better I feel when I go to bed at night. So seeing how all of this stuff that we were doing for him that was extra actually is really something that we could all like benefit from. Like, it's helpful for everybody. That was very powerful.
Yeah. I think it's interesting you use structure, and a lot of times people get a little bit nervous around structure and schedules,
Yeah.
And I teach flexible routines for families, and what you described is that, like, it's structure with freedom.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you really get to understand, like, okay, I have some control here, but I can be flexible too.
Yeah.
And, children really thrive in structure.
They do. And it was fascinating, even for me, how much I was resistant to wanting to do that. Like, it almost felt like I was making everything a chore, is what it felt like. Like, oh, well, now I don't have control of my life because I have all this huge list of all these things I have to do every day. But actually what ends up happening is the reverse. You put this stuff down on your calendar and you have more time to do the things that you have, more freedom, like you were saying, to do the stuff that you want to do. It's interesting how much we resist that. It's very curious to me.
I'm intrigued by that too. I'm always like, as parents, I always say I learn the most from my toddlers and my preschoolers. I'm like, if I just could have their wisdom and like their freedom of like, they just say and think out loud and they do it boldly and feel boldly. Like, man, life would be so much easier, because as adults, we become very shell-shocked.
Yes, indeed.
And we're holding on to things that we shouldn't be holding on to.
Yes, very much so.
And I'm just curious, because I think that sometimes parents are going, like children with special needs, sometimes we know as parents, something's different about you. Do you feel like getting the label helped you or hurt you? Or, because I just sometimes wonder that in the journey.
So I have a love-hate relationship with labels. The reality is we need them. It's the only way we communicate. Language is labels, right? It is what it is. What's frustrating about it is that it is, by its very different definition, limiting based on how it's interpreted by the people around you that you're talking to. And I've got, some examples of that are, if you are a researcher or you read about a problem that you're handling, or you have a diagnosis or your child has a diagnosis and you're reading about it, and you read only medicine stuff, you're going to have a very narrow perception of what could be affected by your diagnosis or what can affect your diagnosis. If you read bigger than that, you can find that there are other things that actually might impact what it is that you're dealing with that you wouldn't have first considered. A lot of personal development skills help my son, you know what I mean? And the doctors don't talk to you about that. They don't talk to you about it in that way because all they're thinking about is autism. So I think that the label is necessary, but I think that you have to be really intentional about asking questions outside of the definition of the label to really find all of the options and solutions that you need in order to get where you want to go. So
I love that. I'm a former school teacher too. And so labels give us information, but they are not the end all or be all of your child. And
at the end of the day, I really wish what we could do is eliminate them, but we do have to still be able to talk.
Right.
And
I think what you said, like naming it is powerful. It gives us
right.
language to communicate, hey, this is what's taking place, but we don't have to identify.
Right. And I think the real strategy in that for me that I have found is the goal is to meet everybody just where they are. Don't make assumptions about where a person is because of the label. And, we're talking about special needs right now, but that goes to everything. Like that's just everything. So you meet people where they're at and let how they respond to you define for you who they are as opposed to the label.
That's great.
Yeah.
Very good wisdom, Jennie. Tell me a little bit if someone is looking to work with you and understand how you support families with special needs. Where would they find you?
So I am online almost everywhere as ConsiderJennifer. That is the best way to reach out and get a hold of me. So my website is ConsiderJennifer.com. And you can get a sense of the coaching services that I provide and the speaking that I do from there. But I'm also on, all of the major social media platforms under ConsiderJennifer. So
great. And what does a program look like if someone were to work with you?
So I have a couple of different programs based on, what needs are there. I'm a very cut and dry, no nonsense sort of person. And so I work best with individuals who know what they're doing isn't working for them. And they're willing to admit that they have some control over making some changes to decide to be happy, to decide to feel better. And so the programs I offer are all based on a certain period of time, like 3 months or 6 months, and then a frequency, every week, every other week, once a month, so that there's some flexibility with price in that. I also offer for people who think it will work, something that I call fast coaching, speed coaching. And it's an unlimited program. But it's unlimited with a 15-minute phone call. So this is for the person who already knows what they need to be doing. They're confident with where they're going, and they have a sense of how to take control of their own life already. They need a knock upside the head because they stepped off the path a little bit, and they need somebody to kind of remember, this is what we're doing. So it's a little bit of a different take on it. It's more of a redirect than a coaching session.
Yeah, it sounds like a little bit like a mentor.
Yeah, a little bit
alongside.
Yeah.
That's great. Yes, we could all use a little parenting mentorship through the journey because there's no manuals with these children.
No, there are not.
So, Jennie, I know that when you have a child with special needs, one of the things that is oftentimes frustrating for parents is when they are thrown out, do some self-care. Do you have a best self-care tip that you could share?
I have a routine that I try to live with very religiously. It's very important because especially through COVID, self-care is real. You really have to put your oxygen mask on first. And my routine really consists of getting up early enough in the morning that I have at least an hour with no noise in my house and a cup of coffee. And I meditate and journal. And then I try to do a little bit of reading with something that inspires me. It sets my brain up for my day. I do not check my cell phone until after all of that is done. And the other thing that I do for myself is I have a weekly bath ritual that I try to do. And it's, I dry brush my skin, I give myself a mask, I sit in the tub and listen to some night music. And for a little while, I was drinking a glass of wine through that.
Like it.
I have switched it up to soda water with lime because I recognize that my body needs that too. And I'm very deliberate with making sure that bath time happens every week.
Probably on your schedule.
It is on my calendar. People know that it's happening. So I think that the hardest thing is setting the routine. Once you get it in order, particularly if you're living in a family, the hardest part was my kids respecting the fact that I was going to do the thing, no, seriously, I will talk to you when I am done. Do not disturb. Unless somebody is bleeding, I don't want to know about it. So, and it was like that. It was hard for a month, and then everybody was like, Mom's taking a bath. So it was fine.
That's really good wisdom to share. Those routines can be so hard to get started, but once you do, it's like magic.
Yeah, it's so much better. So much better.
A lot of freedom on the other side.
Definitely.
So good. Well, Jennie, I could probably talk to you all day here. It's been such a pleasure getting to know you and learning about ConsiderJennifer Consulting, and the work you're doing with families. Helping those with special needs is so encouraging and so needed.
Yes.
And so thank you so much for being here. Thank you to those watching. Thanks for tuning into the Parent Advocacy Resource Team, where we partner with parents to navigate the journey of being a family through education, advocacy, empowerment, and connection. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you. Bye-bye.